extension, replacement, and maintenance of pipeline facilities. In addition, in 2011, the legislature passed Act 13, which is also known as the impact fee. It required review and report of pipeline replacement in Pennsylvania. The report and its recommendations have recently been released, and I, as well as my legislative colleagues, have been busy working on how to implement those recommendations. The Pennsylvania Department of Transportation has road posting and bond program whereby they ensure that those that damage our state roads are held responsible for the repair of those state roads. And most townships and municipalities, boroughs and municipalities, where we see the heaviest of truck activity due to the gas drilling, have entered into road maintenance agreements with the industry so that the industry itself fixes and repairs the roads that they damage. Act 13, which I talked a little bit about in its pipeline safety, has provided that fees are collected and distributed to those impacted counties. And let me say, too, that Act 13 is the most comprehensive update of legislative changes in 25 years. And the dollars that go back to those municipalities and the counties, that monies can be used to offset taxes and a long, long list of other uses for their dollars. Act 13 was structured whereby it provides 60% of the fees collected would go to local governments and impacted, and 40% of those dollars would go to the Marcellus Legacy Fund, which those dollars can be used throughout Pennsylvania in such programs such as the Commonwealth Financing Agency, the Environmental Stewardship Fund, water and sewer projects, rehabilitation of our greenway programs, our recreational trails, our open space, and also there's dollars within that 40% that can go to the maintenance of bridges and roads throughout Pennsylvania. Susquehanna County alone, which you heard that I do represent parts of Susquehanna and Wyoming County. Susquehanna County alone, the county received over $3.9 million, which they're using much of that money to offset local taxes. Other dollars went to local municipalities, 40% of those 40 municipalities, and those dollars were received everywhere from $6,000 to $500,000, which $500,000 is the maximum which a township can receive. And 4 specific townships in Susquehanna County have received that money. Wyoming County received a little over $800,000, and 23 municipalities in Wyoming County have received $7,400 up to $491,000. In 2012 alone, $108 million was distributed throughout Pennsylvania, and in 2013 we anticipate that $120 million will be distributed throughout Pennsylvania through the impact fee. Thank you.
Thank you. Also responding to question number 3, Representative Phyllis Mundy, please.
Thank you. Representative Major sort of laid out the question about what regulations she talked about. The 2011 bill and law that became law that tasked the PUC with the supervision and regulation of pipeline operators, along with FERC. So I want to talk a little bit about Act 13 and what I believe were some of the deficiencies with Act 13. First of all, I think it opened up new issues that we have to be concerned about. One of those is the physician gag order that prohibits doctors from sharing information about potentially toxic or hazardous chemicals used in fracking with their patients. And this is the subject of a lawsuit. Actually, one of our local physicians, Dr. Al Rodriguez, has a lawsuit pending that would overturn that prohibition. Loss of local control that restricts the rights of local communities to determine how to best regulate drilling activities in their neighborhoods. Actually, this provision was thrown out in Commonwealth Court, but it is being appealed. The provision is currently not being enforced while we wait for the court to decide finally. The impact fee, wholly inadequate in my view, and I'm thrilled for Representative Major's Susquehanna County and the communities that are reaping large benefits. But the fact is that our impact fee amounts to an effective tax rate of 2.6%, less than half of the 5.4% rate in Texas or the 6% rate in West Virginia. Surely our citizens deserve at least as much as other gas-producing states. And another problem, concern I have with Act 13 is that even though it did include environmental buffers and setbacks, which I think, again, are wholly inadequate, the loopholes allow DEP to waive these environmental safeguards, such as setbacks. So those are just some of the concerns that I have about Act 13 and the taxes that it imposes.
Thank you. We do have some time. Would anyone else like to respond to that question? Any of the other panelists? Okay, we'll move on to question number 4. What is the response, your response to the claim that the industry is outpacing the understanding of environmental impacts of the Marcellus Shale? And I'd like to start that response with Ken Klimo.
All right, so I thought a lot about this one, and I guess my quick answer to this is yes and no. There's a yes and no to this. And so let me give the yes part and let me give the no part to this. So the first thing is that again, I view this as a scientist and also scientist who reads the newspapers and listens to people. And, you know, there is really a lot that we don't know about the impacts, environmental impacts, health impacts, economic impacts. And, you know, there are a lot of valid concerns that are out there about the impacts. And so some of the concerns, for example, extend to terrestrial. As an ecologist, I look at what I call terrestrial ecosystems, land-based ecosystems. If you drive on Route 29 up to Tunkhannock, you'll see there's a pipeline that's to the right of the road there. And that pipeline goes up the mountain, down the mountain, right through the forest. And so there are what we call habitat fragmentation issues. So we're not really sure what the impacts of those are going to be. The impacts of the long-term impact of well paths. You know, what are they going to look like 50, 80, 100 years from now? Are they going to look like strip mines that look like right now, or are they going to look like farm fields? You know, we really don't know the answer to that at this point. One of the things also we don't know are the impacts to surface water. So are there sedimentation impacts to streams and lakes and wetlands? Are there potential spills that might occur? And in fact, this is one of the things that we're studying at Wilkes. I think, as you know, we have a contract with the Department of Energy to investigate this, and actually we're working very hard. I see a couple of my colleagues actually in the audience here working diligently on providing these answers, and hopefully we'll have some answers before too long on this. But again, it's an open question in terms of whether there are these impacts. Again, are there impacts to groundwater? Now, everybody talks about groundwater concerns, and you know, to what degree are we having short-term water pollution, long-term water pollution, drinking water, and groundwater? Again, there are questions. Certainly, one of the big questions out there relates to air pollution, and just simply whether it's particulates are getting in, what are the effects of flaring, but also, more importantly, what are the greenhouse gas emissions that are out there? We know that there's a study that was done by a group of scientists at Cornell that seemed to indicate that shale gas development actually had a bigger greenhouse footprint than coal does. We think, we know coal is a very large footprint, but on the other hand, if you look at the big picture of the other science, there are many other articles that have come out that have refuted the position of those Cornell scientists. In fact, if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about some of those studies, I actually have over there's some handouts we put together, and we actually have an essay on greenhouse gas emissions. So the point then is that we do have a lot that we don't know about Marcellus Shale development. And so, well, what do we do? Well, the thing that's interesting is that, in my experience, Marcellus is not alone in this question. Some of you might know, and I know a few people on the panel know, that a few years ago I was involved in a very controversial wind farm project. And the wind farm project ran into some opposition. And the thing that we kept on hearing with this wind project is you've got to slow down. We don't know what the impacts are on birds. We don't know what the impacts are on bats. We don't know habitat fragmentation issues. We don't know health issues. There's concerns about this. And so there's a lot of concern about wind development and that they're outpacing our knowledge. We're deploying too many wind turbines. The same could be said about solar energy. The same could be said about geothermal energy. Certainly the same could be said about nuclear energy. And so we're sitting up here and we have bright lights that are shining on us. The energy from those lights are probably 50% coal, 30% gas, 20% nuclear. And so where does that energy come from? Because we all demand energy. It goes back to what Brian Orem said, is that we have difficult choices. Every energy has its critics. And so, but we all use energy. So we have to make choices. And so, again, this is the yes and no response. Yes, there's a lot that we don't know about Marcellus and that we have to investigate, but Marcellus is not alone, and we have difficult choices relating to energy.
Ken, thank you. I'd also like to respond to question number 4. Eileen Cipriani, please.
Thank you. From my perspective, I believe the industry is outpacing the knowledge of the impacts and the understanding of the impacts of the industry. In preparing for tonight, I looked at a lot of academic research on the gas industry, and although you're able to find a lot about the economic factors, we're very short on research giving the public health perspective and the environmental perspective. There was recently an article in the New York Times, and it talked about academic research at the University of Pennsylvania that's about to get underway. And they're partnering with Columbia, Johns Hopkins, and the University of North Carolina to do a study. And they want to look at the health effects from the fracking process, from pollutions from the gas compressors, and from the flare-offs, from the waste energy. And it was interesting to me because the author of the article went back to the researcher and he said, well, why has it taken so long for this study to come about? And he said, simply it's the lack of funding. So it's a very big cause for concern that the funding for these studies and the studies themselves are so far behind the industry and we're playing catch-up. Only last year, the EPA issued new federal regulations for air pollution rules for fracking wells. So we have to be concerned that our oversight and regulation is behind the industry. And we also have to be concerned is the state properly funding agencies like DEP. I mean, they do a fantastic job for oversight, but are they properly funded? Do they properly have enough staff? So there's some of the concerns that I feel on a local level that need to be addressed.
Thank you. I'd also like to ask William DeRogers to respond to 4, please.
Well, this is where it gets interesting on these panel discussions, because of course I'm going to disagree a little bit with my 2 colleagues here. I'm going to start with Ken to my left here. He made a couple comments about the impact of these wells over the next 50, 60 years. Will they resemble strip mining? I have a very solid background in strip mining, actually. Grew up in a quarry up in New York State, and I know exactly what the environmental and long-term impacts of strip mining are. You're effectively changing the landscape forever. You're removing a resource from the ground. Natural gas doesn't have that situation. We're not creating strip mines that are 2 football fields wide and 200 feet deep. In fact, our environmental footprint is 1 acre. So everything that I talked about before with these wells producing energy for thousands and thousands of homes, we're actually doing that from less than 1 acre. Granted, when we're developing the wells, we're taking up roughly 10 acres of disturbance, and that can last anywhere between a few months and a couple of years, and we're not going to argue that point. But when we're done and these wells are actually producing, and we're done with the drilling and the hydraulic fracturing, we're reducing these pads back and we're reclaiming the land. That land is going to be refertilized, it has its topsoil back, farmers can go back to farming, trees are growing, and all you have to do is look to southwest Pennsylvania, where there are tens of thousands of wells already in Pennsylvania that have been operating for 30, 40, 50, even longer. And I guarantee you, if you do not know what you're looking for, you will not recognize what a natural gas producing well looks like in southwest Pennsylvania. But they're literally everywhere. And the farms are around them, and the communities are growing, and they're fine. Now let's get on to air pollution. that is a concern that everyone has, whether it be climate change or just being able to breathe your air outside when you walk outside. For the first time in 25 years, the carbon footprint in the United States is back to pre-1990 levels. And a large part of that is the increased utilization of natural gas. Natural gas, when it burns, is 40% less carbon emission than when you burn coal. And coal, for the longest time, has dominated our energy sector here. So one of the biggest complaints that we have is this idea that natural gas is somehow more degrading to our overall air quality, yet we have scientific proof showing that the air quality across the country, even in areas where there are heavy development, is improving. And I, for one, am glad for that. There are often concerns about flaring. Now, for those who don't know, flaring is a process that we utilize for a few days to a few weeks after a well is complete to bring the well online. We have fluid in that formation that needs to come up, so it does not hinder the overall production of that well. So what we have to do is flow back that water, and during that flow back, you're going to see gas. Traditionally, that gas could be vented, and that's methane, pure methane going up into the atmosphere. And anyone familiar with the science behind climate change and air quality knows that methane is considered a more potent greenhouse gas. So what we do as an industry voluntarily is take a more greener approach, and we flare that off. And by flaring off the methane, we essentially create a spark, create a flame in a controlled way, and that gas is now turned into carbon dioxide and actually water vapor. And if you were to do the math of all of the natural gas produced over a well, of the life of the well for 60 plus years, you'll realize there's more water, H2O, being produced from that combustion of the natural gas than we have used in creating that. Ultimately, though, we are moving towards putting that gas directly in the pipelines. And Cabot has, over the last 5 years, on occasion, had the pipeline available or ready to take that gas to market. So we essentially clean up the gas and move it into sales, which we often prefer. And in the essence of time, I think that's everything I'm going to cover here, but maybe we can revisit it at the end of the program.